If I told you that one of the greatest sports cars ever built was based on an engineering mistake, would you believe me? Because according to every rule of vehicle dynamics, the Porsche 911 should never have existed. Every engineering student learns the same lesson. Keep the heavy components close to the center of the car. Never place most of the weight behind the rear axle. It's unstable. It's unpredictable. It's exactly the kind of design engineers spend decades trying to avoid. Yet for more than 75 years, Porsche has done the exact opposite. And somehow, instead of failing, they created the most iconic sports car in history. So how did a layout that should have been abandoned become one of the most successful engineering concepts ever built? The answer isn't luck. It's one of the greatest engineering stories the automotive world has ever seen. To understand it, we have to go back to Germany in 1948. The Second World War had just ended. Resources were scarce, and Ferry Porsche wasn't trying to build the world's fastest sports car. He simply wanted to build a lightweight machine that was enjoyable to drive. The solution seemed obvious. Use what already existed. The new Porsche 356 borrowed much of its architecture from the Volkswagen Beetle, including its rear-mounted engine. First, this wasn't about speed. A rear engine provided excellent traction on snow and loose surfaces while freeing valuable space inside the cabin. It was a practical decision. But hidden inside that practical solution was a problem that would haunt Porsche for decades. A problem called polar inertia. And that single engineering challenge would shape every Porsche 911 ever built. If I told you that one of the greatest sports cars ever built was based on what many engineers would call a design flaw, would you believe me? Because according to the basic principles of vehicle dynamics, the Porsche 911 should never have become a legend. Every engineering student learns the same rule. Keep the heaviest components as close to the center of the car as possible. It improves balance, stability, and predictability. And above all, never place most of the weight behind the rear axle. Doing so creates a car that can become unstable, especially when pushed to its limits. It's a rule so fundamental that almost every sports car manufacturer follows it. Almost. For more than 75 years, Porsche has done the exact opposite. Instead of abandoning an unconventional design, Porsche devoted decades to perfecting it. What looked like an engineering compromise became one of the most recognizable automotive icons ever created, winning races, breaking records, and earning the admiration of millions of enthusiasts around the world. So why did Porsche refuse to change? Why keep a layout that every textbook seemed to warn against? The answer is one of the most fascinating engineering stories in automotive history. To understand it, we need to go back to where it all began. The year was 1948. Europe was still rebuilding after the Second World War, and Ferry Porsche had a simple ambition. He didn't set out to create the fastest car in the world. He wanted to build a lightweight sports car that was enjoyable to drive, practical enough for everyday use, and different from anything else on the road. The result was the Porsche 356. Its rear-mounted engine wasn't chosen because engineers believed it was the ultimate performance solution. The decision was driven by practicality. Placing the engine at the back provided excellent traction on slippery roads and snowy conditions, while freeing valuable space inside the cabin. For a compact sports car, it was an efficient and logical solution. But there was another reason. The 356 inherited much of its architecture from the Volkswagen Beetle. Along with that architecture came a characteristic that would define Porsche for generations. A phenomenon known as polar inertia. At first, it wasn't considered a major concern. The 356 was relatively light, and its modest power meant the car remained manageable. Drivers appreciated its unique character, and the model quickly established Porsche as a serious sports car manufacturer. Success followed success. But as technology advanced, engines became more powerful, tires became grippier, and drivers began pushing their cars faster than ever before. The very design that had once been an advantage was slowly becoming Porsche's greatest engineering challenge. Because the more powerful the car became, the more the laws of physics reminded everyone that they cannot be ignored. And no model would expose that challenge more dramatically than the car that followed, the Porsche 911. When the Porsche 911 was introduced, it inherited the same rear-engine philosophy that had defined the 356. But this time the car was faster, more powerful, and capable of reaching speeds that pushed both the machine and its driver much closer to the limit. That's when Porsche's greatest challenge became impossible to hide. To understand why, imagine you're running while wearing a backpack that weighs 20 kilograms. As long as you keep moving in a straight line, everything feels perfectly normal. But the moment you suddenly change direction, the backpack doesn't want to follow you. It keeps moving in its original direction, pulling your body off balance and forcing you to fight against its momentum. Now imagine that backpack sitting behind your hips instead of on your back. Changing direction would become even more difficult. That's essentially what happens inside a rear-engine Porsche. Unlike most sports cars, where the engine sits near the center of the vehicle, the 911 carries a significant amount of its weight behind the rear axle. While this gives the driven wheels exceptional traction when accelerating, it also creates a unique challenge whenever the car enters a corner. As the car turns, the heavy engine naturally wants to continue moving in a straight line. Under normal conditions, an experienced driver can use this characteristic to their advantage. But if the driver suddenly lifts off the accelerator in the middle of a fast corner, everything changes. Weight immediately transfers toward the front of the car. The rear tires lose part of their grip. And because the engine is already trying to swing outward, the back of the car can rotate much faster than the driver expects. This phenomenon is known as oversteer. In a fraction of a second, the rear of the car begins to overtake the front. Correcting it requires calm reactions, precise steering inputs, and experience. Hesitate for even a moment, and the car can spin before you have time to recover. This wasn't a flaw that appeared occasionally. It became one of the defining characteristics of the early Porsche 911. Some drivers loved it. They discovered that, in skilled hands, the car could rotate into corners with incredible agility. The rear engine layout gave the 911 a personality unlike anything else on the road, rewarding confidence and precision in ways that few sports cars could match. But for less experienced drivers, that same personality could quickly become intimidating. The 911 demanded respect, punished hesitation, and it never forgave overconfidence. Over time, these early cars earned a nickname that perfectly captured their reputation: the Widowmaker. Not because the car was badly engineered, but because it demanded far more from its driver than most people expected. At this point, the obvious solution seemed simple: move the engine. Many manufacturers would have redesigned the entire car, placing the engine closer to the middle of the chassis to achieve a more balanced weight distribution. It would have solved much of the problem almost overnight. From an engineering perspective, it was the logical decision. But Porsche wasn't interested in building a car that felt like every other sports car. Instead of abandoning the rear engine layout, they made a far more ambitious decision. They would spend decades learning how to master it. From that moment on, Porsche faced a choice that would define the company's future. They could abandon the rear engine layout and start over with a more conventional design. Or they could accept the challenge and spend decades perfecting something that most engineers believed could never be fully mastered. Porsche chose the harder path. Generation after generation, their engineers searched for ways to make the 911 faster, safer, and more predictable, without sacrificing the unique character that made it different from every other sports car. They weren't trying to erase the personality of the 911. They were trying to refine it. One of the earliest and most recognizable solutions appeared at the rear of the car: the famous whale-tail spoiler. To many people, it looked like nothing more than an aggressive styling element. But it had a far more important purpose. At high speeds, air flowing over the car naturally creates lift, making the rear axle feel lighter and reducing stability. The whale-tail was designed to generate additional downforce, pressing the rear tires more firmly against the road, and giving the driver greater confidence when cornering at speed. It was one of the first signs that Porsche wasn't fighting the rear engine layout anymore. They were learning how to use it. The improvements didn't stop there. The rear tires became wider, increasing the amount of grip available where the car needed it most. Suspension systems grew increasingly sophisticated, allowing engineers to better control how the car transferred its weight during acceleration, braking, and cornering. Each new generation became a little more forgiving, a little more precise, a little faster. Yet despite all these changes, the 911 never lost the unmistakable feeling that separated it from every other sports car. Then came one of the most significant turning points in its history. In 1997, Porsche introduced a new generation of the 911, featuring a water-cooled engine. This wasn't simply a change in cooling technology. It gave Porsche's engineers greater freedom to redesign and optimize many aspects of the car. With more flexibility in packaging and engineering, they were able to further improve the overall balance of the vehicle, while preserving the rear engine concept that had become the heart of the 911. The result was remarkable. The same layout that had once intimidated drivers was now capable of delivering extraordinary performance with far greater stability and confidence. The car hadn't become ordinary. It had become refined. By this point, the rear engine layout was no longer seen as a compromise. It had become Porsche's signature. What many once considered a weakness had evolved into one of the greatest competitive advantages in the history of sports cars. The company had proven something few believed was possible. You don't always have to change the problem. Sometimes you simply have to understand it better than everyone else. And just when it seemed that Porsche had finally perfected the formula, the automotive industry changed forever. For decades, the flat-six engine mounted behind the rear axle became the unmistakable signature of Porsche. Sound, its balance, its personality, everything about the 911 seemed inseparable from that unique layout. Then the automotive world entered a new era. Electric vehicles began replacing internal combustion engines, forcing every manufacturer to rethink not only how cars were built, but also what defined their identity. For Porsche, the challenge was unlike anything they had faced before. If the engine was no longer at the rear, if there was no flat-six engine, could a Porsche still feel like a Porsche? The answer came in the form of the Taycan. Unlike the 911, the Taycan doesn't rely on a rear-mounted combustion engine. Instead, its battery pack is integrated into the floor of the chassis, creating a completely different foundation. This placement lowers the car's center of gravity, while fundamentally changing how its weight is distributed. From a purely technical perspective, it's a new chapter. But from the driver's seat, Porsche wanted the experience to feel instantly familiar. Rather than abandoning everything that made the brand unique, Porsche focused on preserving the sensation that enthusiasts had loved for generations. Even with an electric powertrain, the goal remained the same: deliver the unmistakable feeling of a Porsche accelerating out of a corner. It's a reminder that a brand's identity isn't defined by a single mechanical component. It isn't defined by the location of an engine, and it certainly isn't defined by the sound coming from the exhaust. It's defined by the emotion a car creates every time you sit behind the wheel. Looking back, it's remarkable to think that this entire story began with what many engineers considered a flawed idea. A layout that textbooks warned against. A configuration that challenged the laws of vehicle dynamics. A design that countless manufacturers would have abandoned long ago. Porsche didn't ignore those challenges. They studied them. They respected them. And over the course of more than 7 decades, they transformed them into one of the greatest engineering success stories in automotive history. They didn't build the perfect sports car overnight. They perfected an imperfection. And perhaps that's what makes the Porsche 911 so special. Not because it breaks the rules of physics, but because it proves what can happen when engineers refuse to stop learning from them. So now the question comes back to you. Would you choose the perfectly balanced precision of a mid-engine sports car, or the unmistakable character of a rear-engine Porsche 911? Let me know your choice in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more documentaries exploring the engineering, history, and innovation behind the world's greatest cars, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.